Former homicide detectives of Reddit, what was the case that made you leave the profession? Now for the comments. I have a family friend who was a detective. He said one of the worst cases was that of a boy whose father had picked him up by the legs and slammed him against the wall. He said you could see the marks on the wall and that it haunts him to this day. The boy was like 8 and being starved. He took some food from his father and he got mad and raged. It's awful to hear. This one made my stomach churn. I don't understand how people can be so evil towards kids. Good night y'all. I can't do this anymore. My stepson's BO father threw him against the wall when he was 10 months old. SS had whooping cough and his mom had gone to the pharmacy to get him medicine. He lived, is now in his 30s. I do think he has some slight problems, reasoning in some instances. My husband adopted him when he was 3. No, BO father never got in trouble for it. I'm still unclear as to why. It's disturbing. Any idea if the father is still in prison? I hope. Sometimes these stories make me want to write letters to the ones in prison telling them they're scum, but also they're crazy and most get out before they die, so IDK not a good idea. Okay, I'm done. It seems ridiculous to me that people who adopt have to fight through miles of red tape, yet any asshole who can get laid can just have a child. In 2009, my dad got laid off. We were friends with the chief of police in our town, and he put my dad through the police academy. My dad's first month on the job, a woman was killed in a hit and run. It was a small town, so this was big news at the time. Except the driver drove over her and it crushed her skull and her spine was sticking out. He almost passed out and quit a few months later when he got another job. When I was 7 I saw a man's skull getting crushed by a truck in India. I had nightmares for days. Crazy sound it makes, can still remember. Current detective of around 8 years now with 14 in law enforcement as a whole. I've seen lot I wished I hadn't and many more that were unremarkable and not worth remembering. Kids are always the hardest and most unnatural. Heavy decomps are weird and pretty awful. But I think I speak for most anyone who is credibly answering this question. It's never one case. It's just the whole pile over many years. I liken it to rolling a d20. Every fucked up scene is roll for insanity. One day it's gonna come up a 1. Hey, if it does come up a 1 it's okay. Just call it what it is. PTSD is a real issue and help is very powerful. Don't forget you are loved and there are people with compassion. You're the second person here to mention rolling a d20 and having it come up 1. I can't figure out the meaning. Help a redditor out? Thanks. I'm sorry to admit this, detective sir, but your R&D reference drove home for me your humanity. I know you're a person doing a hard job that we need you to do for us. But simply put, my perception of law enforcement has always been of the uniform before the person. I'm ashamed of myself. Thank you, friend. May you never see that crit fail. My dad retired from the state police. Early on in his career he was a diver for them, recovering drowned bodies, that sort of thing. One winter he had to recover the body of a snowmobiler whose sled had fallen through the ice. Brought the body up, and the skin on the guy's knuckles was gone, worn right to the bone. Why? Because when he went down he got disoriented and lost the hole in the ice. He'd worn his fingers bloody trying to claw his way through the ice. Dad said he put in for a transfer the next day. He was done with diving for bodies FFS. Edit. Wow. This blew up. Thank you for all the upvotes and the awards. Dang. Also it's safe to say I never go on ice over bodies of water. Nope. Never. I have a persistent fear of finding a dead body in bodies of water. The thought of diving to deliberately look for them blows my mind. Such important work though. Mad respect. Fuck, that's terrifying. That poor man. A good friend of mine died several years ago after the driver of the car he was in veered into a lake. Driver died on impact, but my friend's autopsy said that his knuckles were severely bruised due to trying to break the car window in an attempt to escape underwater. Horrifying hearing that stuff, knowing they tried so hard to escape death and ultimately failing. My dad was a police officer and he and his co-worker arrived on the scene very quickly after a snowmobile had gone through the ice. 2 teenagers trying to cross a river and the ice wasn't thick enough. The 2 officers could see the boys screaming and struggling trapped under the ice and they tried so hard to help them, but in the end they weren't able to and the boys didn't make it. Dad had seen a lot in his life. He was an EMT and a volunteer firefighter before his time as an officer, but after that experience he was offered time off and counseling and he took them up on it. After that the entire department was trained in cold water rescue. I don't think dad ever really got over it, but really who could? This is the most horrifying thing I have read in a long time. That is my primary fear. Drowning underwater and the only thing between me and air is a thin sheet of glass or ice. I just know I can break it. I just can't push hard enough while floating. Air is so close. Just one more inch. My mum was a police diver too, but the climate is warm. She never told me any stories about dives, but she did mention that you could always tell when someone found a body in murky/dark if you were supervising from above because they'd startle and there would be a sudden rush of bubbles. My dad worked homicide for 4 years while I was between 6 and 10 yo. He led an investigation where a set of parents let their 7 yo take a bath by himself as they usually did, and somehow the kid drowned. My dad had to carry the kid out and apparently he looked almost identical to me. My dad dropped his badge off at the station on the way home that night. First, I'm sorry your dad had to see that, but how the FCK. Edit. Reading these comments makes me not like water anymore. To elaborate slightly, all he mentioned was that the parents were incredibly negligent. According to the investigation of the house and the extended family, the ruling was involuntary manslaughter, which is awful, but, fortunately I was spared the rest of the details. I'd think it would be super rare for that to happen. If parents are at all careful with their kids, making them aware of dangers, and making sure they form good safe habits. Do you know any further details? Was it really like that, or was there foul play? I'm tripping out man, I have a 2-year-old boy and that just terrified the living fuck out of me. The thought of him drowning in a bathtub is too much. I wonder what happened. My mom left me unattended at that age, though the bath was never very full I guess. Not me, but my brother knows a lot of cops who ended up quitting after a few cases. Probably the two I remember him talking about the most that really messed with some of his cop friends and caused a couple of leave was walked in on a murder case where a man's brain had been beaten out his skull. It was so bad. Not only was her pronounced doer, but there was brain matter and blood on the ceiling. A mother begging my brother and his co-workers to promise that they'd find her daughter who went missing. My brother always says never to make a promise to a parent like that. Not only does it build them up to possible hit the ground harder, but it can also mess you up too, that you wasn't able to keep that promise. They ended up finding her daughter's body, and when my brother and another cop went to deliver the news, he said it was really hard to keep a blank face, while this mother proceeded to fall to her knees and have an emotional breakdown right there in front of them. After that, my brother refused to deliver any more news about a parent's dead child. I don't see that it would be bad to cry along with them. Probably be a lot less stressful for everyone. Actually, have seen brains splattered on a ceiling. Will never be the same after that. Source: QRF on a rocket attack in Kamilayat near Sadr City, Iraq. My dad was a coroner investigator. He didn't do autopsies, but investigated the body at the scene. A lot of suicides with brain matter, burn victims, car accidents, and other weird situations. He had one 400-pound man with a macro penis asphyxiate under his bed with his pants around his ankles, which was the weirdest. Some stuff he said he would never tell me because it was too graphic. He often had to tell the next of kin. He said that was the worst part of the job. He didn't do it for more than a year or two. Of all the police officers who I came into contact with after the murder of my father, the one I like to remember was the senior detective who stood up when I entered the room, shook my hand, and told me he was sorry for my loss. Just because your relative's death is a piece of work for other people didn't mean you're okay with being treated like a piece of work yourself. The family liaison officer assigned to us was such an utter cunt. I don't know to this day how I kept my hands off her. Rude to me, but flirting with my husband, giggling in the corridor while I was registering my dad's death, scolding me when I asked for confirmation that they had the guy who did it in custody, who told you that, your boss, you are very low down everyone's list of priorities as a family member of a homicide victim. No saying whether the accused gets to plead guilty to a lesser charge or be tried for a more serious one. So for beating and terrorizing a disabled man in his 70s and leaving him to die on the floor, moving his wheelchair and walking frame out of reach to make sure he couldn't get help, he served 3.5 years and he's out again committing more violent offenses. I've seen them reported in the news. My father was a police officer and suddenly changed career paths to being a cartographer. When I was a teen I asked why. His final straw had been showing up first on scene to a fire. The man outside was on PCP telling him and his partner his toddler started it. As my dad went around the building looking for a safe entrance he found a little boy huddled. When he picked him up his skin slid off like a glove. He was just holding this child, skin splitting and sliding, trying to get him to a safe area to be cared for. The man and woman tried to take him from my dad saying they'd finish the job. Turned out the parents, while high, set their toddler on fire in the house, which then went everywhere. Somehow the kid ended up outside, but burned so badly. My dad apparently came home, according to my mom, sat in our rooms all night going back and forth between me and my brother just watching us sleep. The next day he went to a friend at City Hall and got a job using his cartography skills from the military and turned in his badge. He eventually went back to being an officer many years later but ultimately left again for reasons I don't know. He went on the road as a long haul trucker so that he didn't have to see people anymore. That's horrifying. I can't imagine what that must have been like. Harder to imagine what people would do that, drugs or no. This is probably the worst one I've read so far. Never became a detective, but interned with my local medium-sized city department while in college. First thing in the morning, 6:30 AM, I went with a detective to respond to a suicide call. Got there and he had me talk with the man's wife while he got caught up with the responding officers. She was obviously inconsolable and I wasn't trained to deal with this. I did the best I could. The man was naked with a belt around his neck on the bedpost. All his blood was in his head, hands and feet. They were so bloated. They said it was probably a slow death because he was relying on his own partial body weight. I saw my internship through, but I decided that day I wouldn't be a cop. Well, that was altogether horrifying. Thanks for sharing though. Damn. Also, sounds to me like that weird autoerotic asphyxiation thing. Not meaning to make light of your story, just commenting on the similarities. Based on what I'm reading in this thread, he may have given you a really good experience to have before you decide on that career path. The fact that he was naked makes me wonder if it truly was a suicide. Ever see that show Lieutenant Joe Kender Homicide Hunter? He was a really good homicide detective that solved like 400 murders. He said in an interview that he quit being a detective after a pedophile was arrested and trying to say the kid he molested came on to him. According to Joe Kender, he beat the shit out of the guy and resigned and retired that day. Kender has a new show on Discovery Plus called American Detective. He tells other detective stories on it and it's great. I love Kender. But that interview happened after a murder in which the 5-year-old killed was wearing the same pajamas that Joe's son had worn as a kid. A couple I know, older couple, went on a mini vacation, so I stayed at their place to take care of their pets. They came home to me watching his show and said, I remember that in the news. Close by our old place. Hey, we know him. They worked as teachers and the husband had also been the principal near Colorado Springs as well as rode as EMTs, maybe paramedics. They ran across him a few times. I'd help around their house and we'd end up watching an episode here and there and they'd tell me about hearing the story as it happened in the media. One episode was on a former student of theirs. Funny story, I was on an Alaskan cruise with Kender and his wife. I got pictures and his autograph, but I wanted to ask him so many questions so bad. Obviously I didn't, but we ran into each other throughout the cruise. My. Great show. He spins a long intriguing yarn and never forgets to respect the victim. I wish the flashbacks were set with the 70s clothing, like you were watching the streets of San Francisco. That would be cool. The pedophile molested his 5-year-old grandson. Kender later explained in his book and in an interview in 2018 that his decision to retire was motivated by an incident in August 1996 involving a 74-year-old man who had sexually assaulted his 5-year-old grandson, as there were no open interrogation rooms that day. Kenda had the man brought to his office. When the man justified his abuse by saying the boy came on to him, Kenda recalled that he wanted to just kill this guy and put his hands on him before fellow officers intervened, and Kenda ordered the man taken out of his office. He then sat down at his typewriter and typed out his letter of resignation, effective September 1st, 1996. Joe Kenda. He has a new show on Discovery Plus where he has stories from other detectives. Really good. Kenda is great. On cold cases, these criminals think they have gotten away with what they did. Well, over time, friends aren't friends anymore. Wives become ex-wives. People get jammed up on other charges. And the circle is no longer tight. And then we show up. Classic. That show is absolutely riveting. Discovered it. Watched every single episode. Some several times. His book is on my must-read wish list. Thanks for watching. Hit the subscribe button and activate the notification bell for more videos. Also like the video if you enjoy it.